After collapse of Soviet Union, all ex-communist countries turn into Wild West. Criminals become more daring. They are organized, well-armed and equipped. Murder, stealing, extortion, and rape becomes their trademark. This is one of many true stories about those criminals and brave, determined people who try to bring them to justice. Previously. On January 4, 1999, a man's body with signs of a violent death was found near a grave in Khimkiv Cemetery. It soon turns out that deceased is Alexander Ovsyannikov, who was supposed to fly to USA that day with his friends Vlad Kirkin and Max Altish, but no one got on the plane. The investigators found out that in 1996 Alexander married Emily Morgan, an immigrant from the USSR to the USA. He moved to USA, where he got a green card, worked and lived happily. Several days later, burnt bodies of Vlad Kirkin and Max Altish were found in a builder's hut on the outskirts of Moscow. They were identified by the same belt buckles. After examining all leads, investigators were inclined to believe that murders took place in connection with past of Kirkin and Altish. Before leaving for the USA, both were engaged in pimping. However, soon investigators find out a surprising fact: two burned people are not Kirkin and Altish, but completely different persons. Kirkin and Altish have staged their own deaths and left to USA, killing their best friend before departing. Investigators immediately checked passenger list on the plane. Saint-Jebnov Vladimir Nikolaevich and Mitrofanov Oleg Pavlovich flew in the places indicated by the stewardess. So, Alexander's murder was carefully prepared in advance, including the preparation of fake foreign passports. Investigator Karpov immediately reported to Russian Interpol office. On January 3, 1999, Russian citizens Vladislav Kirkin, now Oleg Mitrofanov, and Maxim Altashev, now Vladimir Saint-Jebnov, entered USA with forged documents. He informed his American colleagues that these two are suspected of murder of 3 people in Russia. He also requested all information about suspects' activities in USA. At the same time, circumstances of the incident begin to become clear to investigators. On the evening of January 2, Altish and Kirkin found 2 men, most likely homeless people, and took them to a construction hut. There they suffocated them and left them until the next morning. Having killed their friend Alexander at cemetery in the morning, the two went to hut, put their belts on corpses and set everything on fire. Only one unanswered question remained: why did they kill their old friend? Karpov visited Alexander's family again, but decided not to disclose this version of events for the time being. He just delicately asked if there was any conflict between the friends. The answer was no. While Karpov was looking for an answer to this question, he received news from Interpol. Vladislav Kirkin and Maxim Altish were in the USA at the invitation of Emily Morgan. Both were in FBI database for collaboration with Latin American drug gangs. Karpov thought that Alexander might have known something about this occupation of theirs, so Kirkin and Altish killed him. Maybe for the same reason his wife Emily is also in danger. Furthermore, it would be easier to kill him in Moscow, where it was no problem for guys with their past to hire a hitman. It was decided to secretly guard Emily. Fortunately, Emily was in her room almost all the time, only rarely going out for a walk near her hotel. Operatives did not notice anything suspicious. On the day of her departure, she successfully reached airport and checked in for a flight to New York. When Emily's plane had already taken off, an urgent message came from Interpol to Karpov. The bodies of Kirkin and Altish were found in one of the suburbs of New York. FBI Special Agent Nick Ryder, who specializes in Russian mafia, informed that both friends had their throats cut. Altish and Kirkin's parents, who had already buried their sons, now learned that both had actually been killed in USA. Families asked to help deliver their bodies to Russia for burial. After several days, both bodies were delivered. Pathologists had not performed an autopsy in USA, so they decided to do it in Russia. After 3 days, completely unexpected autopsy results arrived. A strong, rare poison was discovered in both organisms. Altish 5.7 milligrams per kilogram and Kirkin 6.3 milligrams per kilogram. This concentration was not fatal, but it was determined that poison was ingested in small doses over a long period of time. As a result of this concentration of poison, irreversible processes began. People died not from poisoning, but from failure of internal organs within 2 to 3 years. This process is irreversible. It was clear that guys did not use this poison willingly. How could it get into their blood? Who organized it? It was decided to check for this poison in remains of Alexander Ovsyannikov. Permission was obtained for his exhumation and examination. In Alexander's body was found 12.8 milligrams per kilogram of the same poison. In order for poison to accumulate in body without killing at such a concentration, it had to be used for 1 to 2 years. As experts explained, poison is usually fed to victim through alcohol or some other drink with a strong taste or smell. Karpov sent his colleague Captain Lubanev to a meeting with relatives of all the dead, to find out what drinks everyone preferred. Vera Ovsyannikova said that Alexander did not drink alcohol. He was a good driver, but since he started living in USA, he drank freshly squeezed fruit juices, Emily recommended. She gave them to him in the morning with remark that it was for health and energy. Altish and Kirkin's parents also remembered that their drink-loving sons started drinking juices after moving to the United States. Emily the poisoner? It can't be. Karpov asked Alexander's mother and sister whether they had noticed anything unusual in Emily's behavior before she returned to United States. Mother Vera remembered that when they went to get Alexander's death certificate, Emily surprised her with an incomprehensible signature and asked her to fill in everything as she wanted. Employee was also surprised at how carefully Emily followed the execution of all documents, checking every line. It was decided to visit Hotel Moscow where Emily was staying. Hotel staff had known Emily Morgan for a long time. She often visited here, and always booked the same room. Also, on other occasions she did it under a different name. To employees of hotel she was better known as Natalia, a ballerina from Odessa. Investigators asked for all the records of Emily's previous visits to the hotel and went to see her favorite room themselves. It was spacious and comfortable with a view overlooking the Great Theater and its square. Experts were looking for traces of the poison in the room. Karpov urgently sent his investigator to Odessa to find out everything about her life before emigration. In the meantime, information came from laboratory that the poison in her room was not found, but hotel dug up everything about Emily's visits. First time it was in 1974 with the name Natalie Brown, then from 1981 as Kimberly Robinson, and from 1987 as Emily Morgan. In 1991, she came together with Frank Danieli, an Italian-American. He had performed an operation in Russia, because after 10 days he walked around with a bandaged face and immediately left, even though he had a visa for 3 months. Karpov requests information from the MID. He receives confirmation that Frank Danieli really visited Russia in 1991, but he never left. News also arrived from Odessa, including photographs. Natalia Berezna was born in 1955, graduated from Odessa Choreography School in 1971 as ballerina. In 1974, she emigrated to USA, married William Brown. Investigator found out that her school teacher Ksenia Yesnovskaya, with whom Natalia was very close, now lives in Moscow. Karpov went to visit Yesnovskaya, but she had died a few years ago. Fortunately, story of Natalia Rudjak was well known by Ksenia's daughter Maria. On the initiative of her mother, Natalia had been performing since the age of 5. When girl turned 10 years old, her mother died, but Natalia did not give up dancing. She continued to train even harder every day. Although she had little talent, her perseverance and tenacity were enormous. After finishing her studies, she was accepted by the Odessa Ballet Theatre, but girl dreamed of something more, of world class, of the great theater in Moscow. Natalia tried to prove herself in Moscow 3 times, but she was not accepted. During her last trip, she met a soloist from an American ballet troupe, which was visiting the USSR at that time. After a passionate night of romance in a hotel Moscow, man didn't want to part with his new love. Soloist asked his producer to accept Natalia in their troupe, if only for 1 season. Producer could not refuse his star. The problem with emigration to the USA was solved easily. At that time it was possible to emigrate to Israel and then from there to the USA. She didn't stay as a ballerina for long, she simply married her husband and became an American. Karpov contacted Nick Ryder through Interpol and requested information on all of Emily's Morgan's ex-husbands. What happened to them, and most importantly, who is the mysterious Frank Danieli? Shortly after requesting this information, a call came from Moscow Hotel Administration. They had received Emily's Morgan's reservation for her favorite room, B510. Karpov urgently passes this information to the Interpol, who was already sending him data on Emily Morgan. There were a lot of interesting things to read. In 1974, she married Sergeant Bill Brown. 2 years later, Bill Brown died tragically during training exercise. After his death, Natalia ended her career as a ballet dancer and married 67-year-old Peter Kelly, then moved to Chicago with him. In 1981, Peter Kelly died of liver cirrhosis. Half a year later, Natalia Brown also tragically died. Kimberly Robertson, born in 1958, moved from Canada to Chicago in 1981. In 1984, she married 77-year-old Jacob Tomkin, who died of lung cancer in 1987, the same year Kimberly Robertson died in a car accident. Emily Morgan, born in 1960, moved from San Francisco to New York in 1993, opened a cosmetics salon there in 1996, married Russian citizen Alexander Nikolaevich Ovsyannikov in 1996. No less interesting was Frank Danieli, born in 1950, a private detective who works with a large insurance company in Chicago. Interpol wanted him in connection with series of crimes in Europe and USA. Finally, investigators realized what kind of operation Danieli had done in Moscow: plastic surgery. That's why he immediately disappeared without a trace. Karpov asks his foreign colleague Nick Ryder to carry out examinations on remains of Emily Brown's ex-husbands for poisoning and to find out sums paid to her by insurance companies and inheritance. He himself decided to find a surgeon who performed Danieli's facial surgery. Danieli had not visited any of the surveyed Moscow clinics. However, the specialists explained what kind of operation was most likely performed and gave contacts with private clinics that could perform such an operation. One of them, Jans Furchins, remembers Danieli, and how could he forget his greatest achievement of which he is so proud: turning uncle with the big nose into a handsome man. All obtained photos with Frank Danieli's pictures before and after operation were sent to Interpol. February 15 arrived, the day of Emily Morgan's arrival. Investigators who were waiting for her had difficulty recognizing the grieving widow of Alexander in the smiling, charming woman. Karpov was also surprised when he viewed the video recording next day. On the same evening, Emily went to ballet in the big theater. There she met two respectable young men. Emily led them around the theater talking passionately about ballet. This beautiful video session was interrupted by a message from Interpol. In Peter Kelly remains poison was found 43 mg per kilogram, in Jacob Tomkin 41 mg per kilogram. Everything coincided. Poison acted as accelerator of organ failure in Emily's victims and killed them. According to all signs, it was a natural death. There was no doubt that the same fate was destined for Alexander, but something went wrong. His death had to be speed up. Investigators continued to follow Emily. She was very communicative, easily met men. But the main thing was something else. It turns out that she is looking for a personal driver for work in the USA, young and beautiful. It was clear that it was Alexander who had become victim of this earlier. Finally, Karpov received the long-awaited news from Nick Ryder. For the accidental death of Bill Brown in training exercise, Emily received insurance of $125,000, for Peter Kelly $964,000, for Jacob Tomkin $1,916,000, for Alexander Ovsyannikov she had to receive $2,400,000. It was strange that insurance companies simply paid out such amounts of money, but the answer was simple. All these insurance cases were checked by private detective Frank Danieli. He also drew up the acts on tragic deaths of Natalie Brown and Kimberly Robinson, each time providing the Black Widow with a new identity. No doubt, Natalie made her fortune from insurance and inheritances of her ex-husbands she killed. Black Widow, a rare, highly sophisticated criminal, who as a rule is endowed with unique analytical and acting skills. Karpov understood that it would be very difficult to prove Emily's guilt. Good lawyers could argue that poison got into remains of old victims from groundwater, but for the new ones, it didn't matter where it came from. So the only way to catch her was to directly wait for her next victim and catch this Black Widow with poison in her hands. It was decided to help Emily find her new personal driver. However, investigators had to act fast, as any moment she could find her next victim and go back to the United States. From the American side, a FBI employee at the U.S. Embassy, Richard Savarsky, took part in the operation, and the following evening, a sympathetic and charming young man, Captain Igor Lubayev, was sitting next to Emily in the large theater. The very next day, Igor on an old Lada demonstrated his driving skills to Emily by guiding her around her favorite places in Moscow. It didn't take long. Already in the evening, the irresistible Emily, in her characteristic persuasive manner, made an offer to the captain of Moscow police to accompany her to USA. And Igor played the lucky guy. On the next day, Igor took Emily to St. Petersburg. She wanted to visit another capital of ballet, and Igor was preparing to drink fresh fruit juices. It was clear that Igor's plan had succeeded. His task now was to keep Emily in Russia as long as possible. While driving along the St. Petersburg highway, Major Igor informed his colleagues in which hotel Emily wanted to stay. Oktyabrskaya. Investigators immediately started to prepare for the reception of their important guest. Literally an hour after they landed in St. Petersburg, another urgent message arrived from USA. A certain Alberto Dolci had been arrested in Atlanta. He tried to open a cosmetic salon under name of Emily Morgan. Karpov didn't need to look at the pictures of detained person. It was clear it was Frank Danieli. Video cassette with his confession had already been sent to Russia. While Emily and Igor were in the theater, technicians of operative group set up room with cameras and microphones, and in the next room surveillance equipment for monitoring conclusion of this thriller. At this time, a tape of Frank Danieli's interrogation was also received. If everything goes according to plan, his testimony will be very important. After returning from the show at 1:30 in the morning, Igor went to take a shower. Emily immediately took out a packet of juice and poured it into a glass, then added content of a small tube taken out of her purse. She put on her charming smile and with a glass in her hands, she went to the bathroom, where she offered it to Igor. At this moment, the audience in the next room decided to stop this show and join its characters. Being very purposeful and ambitious, Natalija Rudjak aspired to leadership and dreamed of fame all her life, but soon all her big dreams began to crumble. She realized that there is only one way to compensate for failures in this life: with money. Unexpectedly getting insurance money for the tragic death of her first husband showed how to get it. A trusted friend and ally, Frank Danieli, helped her profitably insure her husbands, while she learned about poisons. Apart from money, the hunt for husbands brought another addiction to Natalia's life: irreplaceable excitement and sharp feelings. Danieli realized that looking for new victims in the USA is risky, so he advised to do it in Russia, but when Alexander Ovsyannikov fell into their nets, Danieli, knowing what was happening in Russia, advised not to waste time with poisons and to kill Alexander in his homeland. All the effort was placed on Alexander's two friends Max and Vlad, both of whom were independently blackmailed with their illegal work in the USA and connections with local drug dealers. In the end, realizing that both of them had been processed enough, Danieli told them about the plan. He promised to pay them $1 million from insurance for murder of Alexander. As a final step to get them on board, Emily showed them paid original receipt from her previous husband's life insurance for almost $2 million. The two did not hesitate this time and agreed. However, their fate was decided at that very same moment. In the fall of 1999, Emily Morgan, aka Kimberly Robertson, aka Natalia Rudjak Brown, was deported to the United States, where she was charged with the murder of 5 people. In the summer of 2000, a week before verdict was read, Emily was found dead in her cell, poisoned with the same rare poison she used to kill her husbands. Only this time she drank fatal dose at once. No one knows how she got it smuggled in. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave comments down below. Next story in the series: Breaking Bad Russia Style. Product that makes Heisenberg's meth look like candy hits the streets.